Now, as we get started on this topic of living hope, I was reminded of a story. My wife and I have 3 amazing kids, Joey, Gavin, and Ella. Joey is 11, Gavin is 8, and Ella is 4, and they are just so much fun. And about 5 years ago, when my kids they would have been 6 and about 3, my 2 boys, we were just having this man night. Now, man night in my household is a big deal. It just means all the ladies have to get out, and guys are just gonna do whatever guys do, right? We're gonna wrestle, we're gonna burp, we're gonna just have fun, we're gonna eat all kinds of junk food. If it's junk and not good, we are going to eat it. And we were having this man night. It was a big night, big time, and at the end of the night, my son Joey, who was 6 at the time, goes, "Dad, we should watch a movie." And I was like, "Yeah, what do you wanna watch?" And he made me so proud. He picked a great movie, one that would make every man in the room proud. He picked one of the great movies from the trilogy. You know what I'm talking about, Alvin and the Chipmunks. Have you seen this? If you don't know who Alvin and the Chipmunks are, they are just the best. First of all, if you don't know who they are, what is wrong with you? But they're the best. They're these 3 chipmunks, and they sing. They have these beautiful voices that sound like they've inhaled a little helium and maybe some crack, and they're just fun. And I'm gonna spoil the first movie for you. If you haven't seen it, you had 10 years, okay? But I'm gonna spoil it for you because these 3 chipmunks, they find a man named Dave, and Dave kind of adopts them as his own, kind of. Like he's on the fence, he's unsure if he wants to be a dad, and so he kind of sort of adopts them, but they have some rough times, and as they have rough times, the chipmunks fall into the hands of an evil person named Ian. Well, I'm watching this with my boys, and my son Joey, you gotta remember, he's 6. He's seen this movie dozens and of times at this point. He's seen it so many times, and he's watching the movie with them, and all of a sudden I look over, and at this kind of really sad part in the movie when it seems hopeless, I look over and Joey's crying, like ugly crying, like ladies, the first time you watch The Notebook, ugly crying, snot just up everywhere. It was just gross in this moment. And I'm watching, and I look over and I'm like, Joey, what? You've seen this movie so many times. What are you doing? And he goes, "Yeah, I know, Dad." I said, "Well, you know what happens, right?" He goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, why are you crying if you know what happens at the end?" And he goes, "Dad, I can only think about right now. Like it's all I can think about is what's happening right now in this moment." I wonder how many of us, if we're just honest, that sums up our life. All we can think about is right now. Whether it's because of busyness or stress or work, or whether it's because we feel hopeless for our future, no matter what happens, it's like all we can think about is right here and right now. And I just wonder for how many of us are we missing out on the beauty of life because our life has just gotten so hopeless because all we can see is what's happening right here and right now in our lives. Now, the Bible talks a lot about hope. Hope is a huge deal. The author of Hebrews calls hope an anchor for our soul. And anchors don't just ground you, they actually were designed to pull you towards the future. Not to cause you to be anchored to your past, but instead to draw you towards something possibly greater than what you're experiencing now. Like we were all born full of hope to be hopers. And when we're kids, we have little hopes of presents that we will get, places we will get to go, friends that we hope to make. As we get older, we have friend circles we hope to get into, grades we hope to accomplish, schools we hope to get into. As you get into college, you hope to make the right kinds of relationships that will benefit your future. You hope to get out of school with as little debt as possible. You get married, you hope to find a spouse, you hope to have kids, you hope to have healthy kids, you hope to find the right house, you hope. And the funny thing about hope is we never outgrow hope. Doesn't matter how old you get, doesn't matter how many life experiences you have, you never singularly outgrow hope. Hope is foundational for all of us, and yet some of us, we just live as if hope doesn't exist. At the end of the War of 1812, America versus England, America won. And it was interesting, historians look back at that era and they call it the era of good feelings. And the reason they called it that is because for about 10 years, Americans were so unified. We were so bonded together. There was such camaraderie. There was such love and joy that we experienced as a country. And they look back and they call it the era of good feelings. And let me ask you this. If we were to assess our culture right now, what do you think they would call this era? Would it be the era of hope? I mean, I don't know that it would be. Check this out. The Center for Disease Control recently released a study that said for the last 3 years, the American age of life expectancy has actually declined. It's actually gone down and backwards. It's the first time in 100 years that our age has actually declined. And you would think it's because maybe cancer or heart disease or something like that. It's not that at all. The reason our age of death has actually started to decline is because of diseases that we can actually prevent. Alcohol-related things, drug-related issues, and opioid crisis. Is that how you say it? Whatever, drugs, right? Bad drugs. And then suicide. Harvard scholars called these the diseases of despair. And it's taking our lives. The marriage rate in our country is actually declining. Why? Because people don't want to start a family in a world that feels hopeless. We live in a hopeless kind of world. And so today, all I want to do is wrestle with one question: where does my hope come from? In a world that's increasingly dark, in a world where you probably brought in some hurt and some failures, some discontentment, some struggle, where does my hope come from? And maybe you walked in today feeling like, I'm giving God one chance. This is Easter, I know it's a big deal, so I'm giving God one chance. Hopefully I'll find some hope today. I hope you do, because today my hope for you is that you'll learn where your hope actually was intended to come from. In a world that feels hopeless, I believe the church should be hope dealers, that we should be the kind of place where people experience the hope of Jesus. Now today what I want to do is I want to look at one story that's connected to the Easter story. If you've read the Easter story, if you grew up in church, you've probably heard some of the Easter story, but I'm going to bet many of you haven't actually heard this story, but it's a huge part of the Easter story, and it happens after the resurrection of Jesus, but on the same day. Because what happens for some people is hope comes early, and yet for some people, hope seemingly comes late. Maybe you're here and you feel like hope hasn't come. The story we're going to read today is a reminder that hope always has a chance to come in your life. Here's what happens. If you know the story of Jesus, Jesus lives this extraordinary life. Everybody wants to see him and hear what he's going to teach. He does miracles and people flock to him by the multitudes to see what he's going to do next. And Jesus is accused of something he hadn't done wrong. He's sentenced to a sinner's death, and he's beaten brutally, nailed to a cross, and he dies for the sins of humanity on a cross buried in the ground that he himself created. It's fascinating what happens. And Jesus dies a painful, excruciating death, and then he's laid in a borrowed tomb. Now, this is fascinating to me because Jesus dies on a Friday. He's going to rise again on a Sunday. That's what we celebrate at Easter. But then there's Saturday. And Saturday is the day that feels hopeless, isn't it? Friday, you watched your Savior nailed to a cross, and maybe you thought to yourself, is it possible that it's true? I mean, he talked a big game. Is it possible that he's going to rise again from the dead? Look, this has been my experience. Like, people that are dead, they don't come back to life. In fact, we know this is true because no one was standing at the tomb when Jesus rose again from the dead. No one was there with the timer counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There was no air horns. There was no pomp and circumstance because nobody expected there to be nobody in the grave again. Nobody did. And Jesus stands, he's dead on the cross on Friday. He's buried, and with him is buried all of the hope of the people who followed him. And Saturday comes, and Saturday just feels silent. Saturday feels hopeless. Saturday feels dark and desolate, and maybe that sums up how you feel. And you need to understand something about Saturday. Saturday reminds us that even when God seems silent, it does not mean that he's not active. We sometimes think that God's silence equals his inactivity or his absence. You need to understand that God's silence doesn't. When God is silent, he is always at work, and he's always at work on your behalf. And so Jesus rises from the dead on Sunday, and if you know the rest of the story, he appears to some people, and the word starts spreading, but everyone's like, what? No, that's not true, because I haven't seen him yet, because we want verbal and we want physical confirmation as well. And some people begin to experience it, but there's these two people we're going to meet, and they didn't experience it. They felt hopeless. In fact, they're walking away from their hope. They're walking from their hope to their disillusionment. They're walking from their place of hope and the future to the place of retreating to the place of safety in their past. We're going to meet these two people. Here it is, Luke chapter 24. It says, now that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They need to understand this is so important. There's these two people. We're only going to get one of their names in just a moment. But there's these two people, and they're leaving Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the epicenter. It was where Jesus was, where he was nailed to the cross, where he was buried. Jerusalem was the center of everything. They thought, the people of Israel thought that Jesus would be this king that stepped into the world, who overthrew the oppressive government, who overthrew all the wrong and all the injustice, that it will all happen there in Jerusalem. But Jesus is dead, buried, and they think he's gone. And so they retreat back to the place of safety and security, this little innocuous place called Emmaus. Now here's what you need to know about Emmaus. Emmaus is such a nominal, unimportant city that we don't have a whole lot of records of it. We have biblical and extra-biblical sources that say Emmaus was a real place, but archaeologically, scholars argue over where it was because it was such a non-important city that we don't even know exactly where it was. So these people that have given up all hope, they're leaving the place of their hope, and they're retreating back on a 7-mile walk, about a 2-hour walk from Jerusalem to this place called Emmaus, and they're having this conversation. Verse 14 says they were talking with each other about everything that they had just experienced. All the pain, all the remorse, all the questions they have. Was it true? Yeah. We saw him do the miracles. We saw it, but I know I saw it with my own eyes, but he's dead. And what they understood was when a person was crucified, it meant that Rome won. It meant the government had won. All of Jesus' claims were now completely invalid because he was dead in their mind. They're talking about everything that happened. In verse 15, as they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus just walks up. And I've always thought this was funny. Jesus just strolls up next to them. He catches them in stride, and he walked up along with them. But verse 16 is weird. They were kept from recognizing him. So Jesus is with them, but they don't know he's with them. So try to picture this. They are hopeless, and they're standing next to hope in flesh and blood. They are hopeless. They feel lost. They feel confused. They feel abandoned and forgotten, maybe like you do. And the one who is the source of all of the hope literally walks up next to them, and they're completely shielded and completely unaware that they're literally standing next to hope itself. And they don't know who it is. So then Jesus starts messing with them. Verse 17, he asked them, "What are you talking about as you walk along?" And they stood still, their faces downcast. Of course they were, because they were so sad. One of them, named Cleopas, which slap your mother if you name you that, Cleopas, she asked him, "Are you the one visiting Jerusalem, the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened in these days? Do you have no idea what's been going on in Jerusalem for the last couple days? It's been really weird. Everybody knows about it. Everybody's talking about it." And so Jesus is like, What things? He asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. They're talking to him about him. It's kind of a fun moment in the Bible. And they tell him about himself. Jesus, was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. And the chief priests and the rulers, they handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. And then stop here for just a moment. And then is the turning point in the whole story. They're telling Jesus about himself, no idea that it's actually Jesus in this moment. And they tell Jesus about himself, and then they let out these 4 words that, in my opinion, summarizes the heart of the human condition. They say, "But we had hoped." We had hoped that Jesus, that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel, to set us free from our captives and our oppressors. And what is more, it is the 3rd day since all of this happened. And listen, 3 days have gone by. If he was going to rise from the dead like he claimed he was, he would have done it by now. But it's been 3 days, and dead people don't rise from the dead anymore. So Jesus is gone. They feel like hope is gone. And they laid out these 4 words that maybe for you summarize your story as well. But we had hoped. Now, you need to understand about hope. Hope always lives in the future. Hope is always about what is coming and what will come. You don't hope for things that in the past, because they're over. You celebrate them, you remember them. I would say it to you like this: if you spend your life living out of your memories instead of your imagination, that's the moment you slowly start to die inside. Hope is always in the future. Hope is what is to come. But we had hoped. And when they say this phrase, they use past tense. We had hoped. We had hope at one point, but it's over, it's past, it's done, it's gone. Our hope is lying in a tomb. We saw our hope nailed to a cross. Our hope is dead and buried and gone. Now, if you were honest, how many of us would these 4 words sum up our story? But we had hoped. We had hoped till death do us part would mean till death do us part, but it was really until someone else came along. We had hoped. We had hoped our kids would grow up and love us and love God and be a blessing to the world around them. We had hoped that, but they kind of went their own way. We had hoped to live a happy, healthy life, and then we got the diagnosis. But we had hoped to retire early and travel the world together, but he got laid off. But we had hoped. And if we were to spend time going around this room, all of us have a but we had hoped story. Well, my wife and I had hoped to get married and live a happy, healthy life, and 6 months into marriage, she was diagnosed with cancer. We had hoped to raise a bunch of healthy kids, and we got 3 amazing kids, but in between our second child and our third child being born, we lost the baby late in the pregnancy, and we had hoped to have that baby too. We all have the but we had hoped kinds of moments. What is your but we had hoped moment? You see, to understand something, to find hope, you have to understand where you lost it. To find hope, you have to understand that at one point you had hope, but maybe it's fleeted, it's left you. But we had hoped to find him. And then Jesus goes on to explain to them, like, you gotta understand, you're a part of a bigger story. He talks to these 2 people. You're a part of a much bigger story that's happening, and you can't see it right now. You can't picture in your mind what's actually happening in this moment. It's fascinating. If we could watch this from a distance, they're talking to Jesus about their hope that was dead, which was literally breathing next to them. He was literally alive. He could reach out and touch them. He was alive in this moment, and they couldn't see it. But we had hoped. And then Jesus listens to them talk a little bit more, and he responds with this in verse 25. He says to them, how foolish are you? Jesus is like, I pity the fool. What is wrong with you? Like, I don't understand how you can miss the beauty, the gravity of this moment. How foolish are you, and how slow to believe all the prophets have spoken. You see, what Jesus understood was they didn't know who he was in this moment, but they were about to come face to face with the reality that hope wasn't dead, hope was alive. That they were about to have a defining, blinding moment of clarity. You ever had one of those moments of clarity where you think you know your story? You see, everyone is a story that is being written, and every story demands a great ending. And so many of us, we have no idea what's going to happen at the next page of our story, and yet we have these blinding moments of clarity. I heard another story recently about this amazing married couple. They've been married for over 60 years, just in love with each other. They were faithful to each other. They kept no secrets from each other except for one small thing. The wife, early on in their marriage, said to her husband, babe, I have this one thing I just want. I'll be faithful to you. I'll always be true to you, but I just want to have this one little place that's mine. This place that you don't interfere with. It's just my little place of safety, just a box. And I'm going to keep it in my closet. Just never mess with it, okay? Husband said, fine, I'll never mess with it. Well, 60 years of marriage went by, and it never even crossed his mind as something to worry about. It was never something to think about. He just kind of left it as is. And they had love that they shared with each other, and they cherished every moment with each other. But as they got older in their years, there was a point when the woman's health took a massive turn for the worse, and the doctor called the husband in and said, sir, I'm sorry, it's not looking good. We're gonna need you to get her affairs in order before she passes. So the husband did what a doting husband would do, and he went back home and he cleaned everything and he went through all of her stuff. And then he looked up in the closet and he saw that box, the little shoebox. So he took it to his wife and he said, babe, listen, you asked me 60 years ago never to look in this. What do you want me to do with it? The woman said, oh man, forgot about that. I guess it's time you know the truth. Open the box. And he opened the box, and when he opened the box, he saw 2 little crocheted dolls and a huge stack of money worth like $95,000. He said, what is this? Why did you keep this hidden from me? And the wife said, listen, when we got married, my grandma pulled me aside and said, babe, listen, you're gonna get angry at your husband, and here's the way to handle it. When you get angry, don't yell at him. Instead, just go crochet a doll. So he looked in the box, and there's only 2 crocheted dolls. And all of a sudden, the husband was just flooded with emotion. 60 years of marriage. 60 years of marriage, and there's only 2 dolls in here. That explains the dolls. What about the money? And the woman said, well, every time I crocheted a doll, I took it down to the craft store and sold it for $5, right? All of us have these moments of clarity, don't we? These moments when it's like our life made no sense, and now it makes a whole lot more sense than it did 5 minutes ago, right? Jesus says to these 2 people who are on the road with him that don't know they're with him, how foolish are you? You have no idea. God is writing a story. And God wanted to redeem the story through the people of Israel. And yet the people of Israel kept messing up, and sin kept jacking up the story. And so God kept trying to make the people that he was going to use smaller and smaller and smaller till eventually no one could handle the weight. So God said, Jesus, you step into the world and you carry the weight of sin. So of course the prophets foretold that I would step into this world. Of course the prophet said that the Savior would come, and of course the Savior would have to die for the sins of the world. But here I am, and they have no idea that they're standing with their hope. Well, then at the end of this journey, they get to this place of Emmaus, and Jesus, they still don't know it's Jesus, but he's like, I'm just going to keep on going. I'm going to keep trucking. And they're like, whoa, 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 whoa. We've loved this conversation. Why don't you just come over to our house and have some dinner with us? So they go back to the house, verse 30. When he was at the table with them, Jesus took the bread, he gave thanks and broke it, and he began to give it to them. And in his brokenness, something just happened to their eyes. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized that it was Jesus. They've been with him like the last couple hours, and now they recognize that it's him. And then he disappears from their sight, and they ask each other, this is so interesting, were not our hearts burning within us while we talked with him on the journey? Well, were not our hearts on fire? Like there was something different about him, because this is the way Jesus works. So often what we want from Jesus is this massive sign of hope that's physical and outside of our experience. We want something we can see, something tangible. And the way Jesus offers hope always starts from within. It's like what Jesus was doing by keeping the people from seeing that it was him, was saying to them, I'm going to give you a hope that it's deeper than you could ever experience on your own, even if you saw it with your own eyes. He goes on to say this. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. And there they found the 11 and those with them, and they assembled them together and said, it's true, the Lord is risen. He's appeared to Simon. And here's what you need to understand from this story. There are these two people that feel hopeless. All hope feels dead, buried, and gone. It is buried with Jesus. They don't know that he is literally alive walking with them. And it says about them when they get to their house and they break the bread, it says that, verse 31, then their eyes were opened. Then they saw that it was actually Jesus. Now they saw with their eyes what they had been experiencing in their heart. Now what's interesting to me is this phrase, this is not the first time this phrase is used in the Bible. All the way in the beginning, the book of Genesis, God creates two people, Adam and Eve. And it says when Adam and Eve sinned, when they disobeyed God, what does it say about their eyes? Genesis 3:7, then the eyes of both of them were opened. What you need to understand about the way Jesus works is it's so counterintuitive and it's so different than the way the enemy works. You say, what does that mean? Well, when you understand this, the enemy of your soul, he opens your eyes to your shame. When you sin, when you find yourself stumbling in life, what you're going to experience is your eyes open to all the condemnation, all the guilt, all the shame that you were never intended to carry. Your eyes will be open to all of the sin and shame that Jesus gave his life so that you could let go of. So sin, the enemy opens our eyes to our shame, but Jesus opens our eyes to our hope. This is the big deal. This is what it is. So to these two people, they're walking this road, no idea that they're literally walking next to the one who can give them this hope, and they're experiencing it for themselves. Final thing is this, 1 Peter says this. He says, praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. In his great mercy, he has given us new birth into what? A living hope. That hope now no longer has to be based on your circumstances. Hope no longer has to be based on how good things are going at work or in your relationship or in your finances, because hope is found like joy. Joy is based on what's happened for you, not what's based on what's happening around you. Hope is based on what Jesus has done for you. He is alive. So we come to the Easter celebration and we remember one thing, that when Jesus stepped into this world, he stepped in for one purpose, which was to die for you. But if that's how the story ends, it's a hopeless story. You need to understand that their Easter story is powerful because when Jesus rose from the dead, everything about Jesus rose with it. All of your hopes can rise again. All of your dreams can rise again. The things that you're holding on to for your marriage, your finances, your relationships, your health, all of it rises again because Jesus rose from the dead. You need to understand that hope is not found in a place. Hope is found in a person, and that person is Jesus. So I just wonder how many of us are walking through this life unaware that hope is with us, unaware that our circumstances may seem bleak, and yet what we experience is that we can experience a living hope that's different than anything we've ever experienced. So what would it look like if you and I made this decision on this Easter Sunday to lean in and experience that hope? I think it would change everything, don't you? Don't you think it would change everything to live with a little bit of hope? The kind of hope that's not based on what's happened in your past. Not the kind of hope that's based on your circumstances, but the hope, like the author of Hebrews says, that anchors your soul to something greater, that pulls you towards a life that God has for you. Jesus rose again, and when he rose again, we can rise again. When he rose again, our hope can rise again. Would you bow your head and close your eyes with me all across this room? I want to pray with you. Jesus, we lean in and we trust you. You are our hope. You're our promise. You are our salvation. Jesus, thank you that you stepped into this world and died, but beyond that, thank you that you rose again. And it's in your life that we can experience life and life with abundance. So we love you, Jesus. Thank you that we have hope. In a world that seems dark and desolate, we have hope. We thank you for it.